Hello, Econ 115 students. Welcome to our first chapter. So this chapter is talking about the challenge of economics. Let's first begin with the learning objectives for this chapter. So the first one, we will explain the meaning of scarcity. Scarcity is the foundation of economics because of the scarce resources, then people or society need to learn how to allocate their resources to satisfy their needs. And then we'll move on to talk about the opportunity cost. Then we'll talk about the three core economic questions. For example, what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. And then we'll move on to talk about the differences between market economy and command economy. So for example, market economy will be let market to solve for the questions to adjust the economy back to equilibrium. However, for command economy, it should be the government's responsibility to take care of the economic situations. And then last, we'll talk about the nature of the market and government failure. Now let's begin with the first one, scarcity and economics. So why can't we have anything we want? That should be a question that people sometimes might ask themselves, right? Because most of the time our wants will exceed our resources, and because of the scarcity, and then we know that scarcity means the lack of the enough resources to satisfy all desired needs or all desired use of its resources. For example, I cannot give my kids like unlimited time for the video games, right? So they need to allocate their video game time like carefully. Okay, which video I need to spend maybe 20 minutes and which video games I need to spend maybe another 20 minutes, right? This is because of their time for play was really scarce. It's not unlimited. Therefore, scarcity forces people to make choices, right? Economics is the study of how best to allocate scarce resources among competing uses. And then you might say, I'm a little bit, I'll always look at this part, right? Because my PowerPoint is at this part. And then I also would like to say, for example, your monthly budget will be also limited, right? If you have unlimited monthly budget, then you don't need to think about how to allocate the money, right? So scarcity is the foundation for all economic choices. Regarding to the resources, so for example, individuals, if we think about individual resources, there could be time, it could be our money, right? And then if we think about the resources in our society, that it could be factors of production. Okay, so factor productions that were used to produce goods and services. And for example, there are several categories of factors of production, including land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Okay, so those we can treat them as factors of production. So opportunity cost, what does it mean? We know that every decision regarding the use of the resources will cause a trade-off, right? And for example, you can think about the time that you're spending to listen to my video or to watch my video or listen to my audio lectures would be the time that you could spend maybe with your friend, hang out with your friend, right? Those are the times that those are something that you need to think about. Is it worth it for me to watch this video? Okay. And the definition of opportunity cost is something that you need to sacrifice to obtain another thing. Okay. And in our textbook, it defined as the most desired goods and services that are foregone in order to obtain something else, right? So it should be the value of the next alternatives. Okay, the value of the next best alternatives. We can treat them as opportunity cost. And then we know that every choices will involve conflicts or like trade-offs. For example, if you go to a movie theater and then you only have one time slot, then you need to choose which movie I should watch, either the action movie or like the romantic comedy. Or after high school, you also face the choices, right? The different alternatives. If I go to, is it better for me to go to find a job first or continue my studies? All those choices all involve trade-offs, involve opportunity cost. There is another saying that there is no free lunch, right? So that means everything that you got free still have its own opportunity cost. For example, I bet you will use like the social media apps such as Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, right? Do you pay out of your pocket to use those social media? Probably not, right? So think, okay, I can use those social media apps free, but is it actually free? You need to think about the opportunity cost. The time that you're spending to use those social apps could be the time that you're doing something else, right? So we will treat the time that you could do something else as the opportunity cost that you spend using those social media apps. Okay? So this is what we say. There is no free lunch. All right. So let's move on to talk about the three basic economic problem question. Okay, so every nation decides three critical questions on the usage of the resources. For example, what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. So any economic system need to answer those three critical questions. Every economic nations. Okay. Now let's look at the first one. What to produce? We know there are not enough resources, right, to satisfy all the needs of the human beings, right? Therefore, as a society, as a whole society, it need to decide what to produce, right? So we need to decide what to produce, what we want most, and sacrifice the less desired activities and goods. In economics, we always use production possibility curve help us to find out the combination of goods and services that the society needs. Okay, so production possibility curve (PPC) in some textbook it also say PPF, production possibility frontier. Okay, so PPC describe the alternative combination of goods and services that can be produced based on the available resources and the technology in a given time. So in this part, I would like to say the PPC have three important points. Okay, so the first one, it should be the combination of two goods. Okay, so combination of two goods. Let me just write it down. For example, it should has the combination of goods. Combinations of goods and services. And then the second one is the available technology and the available resources. Okay, so let's say resources are fixed, right? And another one will be technology. It says the available technology, that means the technology will be fixed for a certain period of time. So technology fixed. Okay. So those are the three key points to describe the production possibility curve. And it will represent the menu of the output choices. Um, it can be presented in either a table or a curve or a graph. So first, let's then a table first, okay? So PPC can be presented as a table, and the question of what to produce is choosing one combination of the output on PPC. So for example, this is the example of combination of missiles and houses, okay, in a whole society. We assume the combination of the goods and services now will be missiles and houses, two goods. And then we have the available resources and available technology. Here you can see it gives the output in different combinations represented by A, B, C, D, and F, right? So we have output A, you can see the point A. We have missile as 0, but house as 100, right? Which means now all the resources were just used in houses production, houses construction, right? And then you can also notice at point F. So at point F, we see there are 250 missiles, but there is no house, which means now all the resources were just putting in meso's production and no houses anymore. So A represents the maximum output of house, and F will represent the maximum output of mesos, right? And there are some other combinations just lies between A and F. And for a society, it needs to decide to choose which combination he wants. Okay, so for example, point C has the combination of 100 mesos and 75 houses. We can also see that from this table, increasing what we say the military production but actually require a reduction of house construction. So for example, if we're moving from point B to point C, okay, choosing from point B to point C, we can see the meso's production increase, right? So meso's production increased from 50 to 100. And at the same time, you can notice that houses construction reduced from 90 to 75. That is because our resources are fixed, right? If you want to increase the meso's production, which means now you need to switch the resources from house construction to meso, okay? So a movement along the PPC requires resources to be transferred from one production activity to the other. This is because our resources are fixed. Resources are limited, right? And this is the way that we represent PPC through table. We can also present PPC through a graph. So this is the general PPC graph. You can see, let me just draw this graph for you. In this graph, okay, I have the mesos. I use M to represent mesos, okay, on the horizontal axis, and I use H here represents house, okay. I use H here represents house. So based on the table, we can see at point A, we will have 0 meso, but 100 houses, right? So point H will be here, like 100 houses, but no mesos, which means point A will definitely on the vertical axis, right? And how about a point F? Point F represents for how many mesos? 250 mesos, right? 250 mesos, but 0 houses, right? So A represents the maximum output of houses. F here represents the maximum output of meso. We can also have different combinations, for example, point C. So maybe at point C here, we will have 75. So at point C here, I have 75. This will be 75 houses, right? And then how many mesos? 100 mesos, right? And at point D, okay, we have another point D here. So point D here, you can see we have 55 houses, and how many mesos? 150, right? So here we have 150 mesos. You can link all those dots, okay? If you link all those dots here, you will get a PPC, okay? So this is what we said, the PPC, production possibility curve, okay? Production possibility curve. And here I want to emphasize several points. If there is a point inside a PPC, so for example, there is a point here. If there is a point I mark as point, let's say point J here, okay? So you can see point J inside a PPC, right? Point J here, I just write it down here. So point J is inside PPC. Point J here inside the PPC, it means now not all the resources will be fully utilized, right? Point J here represents not all the resources will be fully utilized because if we just want to increase missiles production or house construction, we can just move this point J outwards, right? So point J inside the PPC is not an efficient point for society because it doesn't use all the resources. Let's look at another point. So if I have another point here, this is another point I mark it as point K. So you can see the point K here is outside PPC. So what does it mean? If it outside PPC, that means this point K cannot be produced based on the available resources. Point C here is already outside the production of all the resources. Okay, so you can see we have different points. Point A, C, D, F. Those points all on the same PPC. Those are the very efficient production point. However, for point J inside the PPC, this is not an efficient production point because it cannot fully utilize all the resources. Point K is better than all other points on A, C, D, F. However, point K is impossible to produce based on the available resources. Okay? So those are some important things regarding to PPC. Now let's move on to talk about the optimal mix. Okay, so the first economic goal of any society is to produce the optimal combination of output. And then we know always there is one optimal mixed or optimal combination of output at any given time. And the designation of the best rests on the value of judgment of the society. So you can see the best output combination for United States, probably not the best output combination in Canada, right? So every country, they have their own judgment of what would be the optimal combination of outputs. Now let's look at economic growth. Here you can notice when we write down when I talk about PPC, I said there are three key points, right? Combinations of goods and services, resources are fixed, technology fixed. However, when resources or the technology increase, then PPC would change. It would shift outwards. So let's see one example. If the resources now increases or there is an innovation technology now, which means now the society is able to produce more of all goods and services. Economic growth is defined as an increase in output, or sometimes we can say increase in productivity. So economic growth improves the living standards. You can see this graph, okay, shows the PPC in 1900, okay, in 1900. And then it has the horizontal axis as outputs of military goods and vertical axis as outputs of house construction. So this is the PPC in 1900. What happens after 120 years? We know that after 120 years, we have better technologies and then we also have more resources, right? So now the PPC will shift dramatically outwards, right? Once we have more resources and better technology. This is what we say. If these two condition changes, okay, if these two condition changes, it will shift the PPC outwards. Now let's look at the second question that economists try to answer. The second question that economists try to answer is how to produce, right? So the question of how to produce focus on finding an optimal combination of outputs, right? Then you need to think about how can we reach this optimal output. So every country has their own different methods. So it will entails the efficiency in the use of resources and safeguards for environmental and societies. So we always advocate for sustainable development. We will not sacrifice economics, we will not sacrifice environment or climate just for a one-time economic growth. That is unreasonable, right? And we will talk about the second questions in later chapters in details. The third question will be for whom to produce. So once the societies has so large or so many outputs, then how we can distribute those outputs equally or efficiently. So the question of for whom focuses on how an economic output is distributed across all the members of the society. And in the later chapters, we will talk about question 3 also in details. Now, let's move on to talk about the market mechanism. So market mechanism means the market sales and prices, they can send the signals to produce. They can send the signals to produce about what mix of outputs that consumers want. So there is no need direct combinations between the producers and consumers, right? So you don't need to. So for example, I don't need to go to a farm and tell them exactly how much beef I want to purchase, right? What I need is I just go to grocery store and then I purchase the things I want. I don't need to exactly go to the farmer and then tell them what I need, right? So market will allow there is no direct combination of producers and consumers. It will just use the sales and the price to adjust the market. So market sales and price conveyed the message and direct the markets like an invisible hand. So this invisible hand is a very interesting topic talk about in Adam Smith's book. Okay, so this is another one we call like another important concept in economy. That is laissez-faire. Okay, so laissez-faire in economy means just give them 100% freedom. Okay, just let it alone. So it will let the market decide what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Because market has an invisible hand to guide all activities. And this is promoted by Adam Smith in his book, The Nation, The Wealth of the Nation. Okay. So in Adam Smith's The Wealth of the Nation, it promotes this what we call so-called a laissez-faire economy. Okay, laissez-faire economy. That the market decide everything, decide all the activities. On the contrary, there is another type of the economy is based on the central planning. So the central planning is the doctrine that everyone needs will be fulfilled and then it will be decided by the government. So it will based on the government to decide what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Okay. So who advocates or promotes the central planning? From Karl Marx, okay, in his book called Capital. Okay, so in his book, he promotes the communist economics. So currently, there is, we can say there is rare a nation that use purely market economy, and then there is a nation or a country that use purely communist economics. Most of the time, it will be the mixed economics. So economics that use both market or non-market signals to allocate goods and services are so-called like mixed economics. So for those mixed economics, the market and the government, they work together to decide what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. So most of the nations now today have mixed economics. And now let's look at why currently the nations will use mixed economics, because if it just that market decides everything by itself, market sometimes will face failure. Okay, so market face failure, that means market do not always produce the right combination of outputs, and the market failures occurs when the market mechanism, okay, doesn't generate the best possible or the best combinations of outputs. So in presence of the market failure, then government intervene is necessary. Okay. Not only market will face failure, government will face failure as well. Okay. So government failure occurs when government intervene, fails to improve the economic outcomes. And there is no guarantee that the invisible hand and the visible hand of government will be any better. Okay, which one will be better? So there is no guarantee which one will be better. You might say, okay, I think the government will be better than just market, or maybe market will be better than government. No, there's no like there definite judgment about which one will be better. So now let's move on to talk about the last part, the macro and micro. So this is the outline of economics. So in our class, we'll introduce both microeconomics and macroeconomics. So what does macroeconomics focus on? So macro, okay, focus on the study of the aggregate level of economics, or study the economy as a whole. So for example, we might study the whole nation's income, uh, the whole nation's price level increase or decrease, that is inflation, right? And then what happens to the whole nation's employment, okay? This is macroeconomics. For then differently from the macroeconomics, the micro focus on single agent activities. For example, single, like their households, their decisions, the purchasing decisions. Um, what about the production decisions from a single firm, single corporations? This is what we mentioned for the microeconomics. So now, after that, I will just introduce some important concepts for this chapter. Okay, so let's just summarize what we have. The first one, we talk about the meaning of scarcity, right? Scarcity means there is no enough resources to satisfy all the desired needs for the society. And then we also talk about opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is something that you need to sacrifice to obtain the other items. We can also mention that opportunity cost will be the next best alternatives you need to give up. We explain the society's three core economic questions: what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. And then we also move on to talk about production possibility curve, right? And then also talk about how market and command economics differ from each other. For that, we know now most nations will use mixed economics, not the purely market economy or central planned economy. And then finally, we talk about why market or government sometimes might be failures. Okay, so that will be the studies for this chapter. It has or some appendix followed by the lecture slides. It talk about the graphs, and I think those following lectures will be helpful for you to get some refreshment about how to draw a graph and then how to compute the slope of the graph. Okay, if you are interested, you can just browse all those appendix. Thank you so much.